So welcome everyone. My name is Melainie Rogers. I am the founder and CEO at Balance Eating Disorder Treatment Centre. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar, The Vital Importance of Health at Every Size and Body Liberation in Treating Binge Eating Disorder. I am a certified eating disorder registered dietitian and supervisor, and co-presenting with me today is my dear colleague and friend, Dani Bryant, who's one of our amazing therapists here at Balance. Dani, did you want to briefly introduce yourself before we go through some, run of the show?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Dani Bryant. I'm a clinical mental health counselor and a drama therapist. My background is in professional theater and playmaking. I love to make plays about food, body image, and recovery. And now I am deeply passionate about health at every size and body liberation in recovery spaces, but also all spaces.
Wonderful. So great to be doing this today with you, Dani. This topic and this presentation actually is very near and dear to both of our hearts, Dani and myself. I actually started my career in eating disorders working with binge eating disorder, which was 20 years ago when we didn't even have a formal diagnosis for binge eating disorder. So it's been quite an amazing journey, honestly, to see how the field has evolved in the last 20 years with respect to treating or even acknowledging that we have an eating disorder that's called binge eating disorder. We'll be talking a little bit about that history today. And also, thank goodness, as the field has evolved with respect to weight stigma and conversations around weight bias. As you'll see from today, we've made some progress, but we still have a long way to go. And from honestly the overwhelming number of participants who've signed up for today's presentation, that I think certainly indicates to us that it's a topic that a lot of people are interested in, that we definitely need to know about. And so I hope that what we present today certainly gives viewers some crucial information and also helps with this very important conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So before we do jump into our first slide, just general run of the show, Dani and I will be co-presenting throughout. We've allowed an hour for our presentation today, so that certainly includes time for your very valuable questions. Any questions you may have, pop them in the chat box is the easiest, or use the Q&A. And then as we go through, Dani, while you're presenting, I'll be checking the chat box, and while I'm presenting, Dani will do the same. And some of your questions we'll be able to answer along the way, should they be relevant to the current slide. If there are a more general question, we may save those for the end and then go through those once we've completed our slides today. So without further ado, Dani, if you're ready, let's jump in, shall we? If you'd like to progress to the first slide. So the very big question, what is binge eating disorder? And what we've laid out here for you is kind of some of the classic structuring or explanation around what is binge eating disorder. And this is extracted from the DSM-5. So binge eating disorder is a pattern of eating whereby our client or yourself, you're significantly eating larger amounts of food in a short period of time. Larger amounts of food being an objective measure of a larger amount of food than maybe one would normally sit down to. So I'm sorry, some of this is a little bit descriptive and therefore less concrete in what I'm saying there. But an example might be, a client might say, I ordered 2 entrees last night and that's what I had for dinner, as an example. If we could go back to the first slide, Dani, thanks. Great. The consumption of food is often to the point of discomfort and brings on feelings of emotional numbness, shame, and or sadness, among other complex emotions. A lot of our clients wake up the morning after with a lot of self-disgust and regret, a lot of self-flagellation, a lot of, okay, well, today I have to diet and restrict to make up for what happened last night. There's a sense of lack of control when binge eating. So that's a real significant point there. And I say that in particular because Thanksgiving is around the corner, literally days away. Some of us may overindulge with overeating there and say, gosh, was that a binge? but the key piece there is the lack of control. Eating is often alone or in isolation, and it feels like a secret, and hence there's a lot of shame that's attached to it as a result of that. Eating can be ritualized. Similar types of food, for example, or often in a certain order. Clients will report to me that, their binge foods are, for example, I'm making this up, but let's say I order a certain pasta dish with a certain pizza with a certain type of ice cream, and that's what I consume in one of my binges. The binge episodes occur at least once a week for 3 months. And that last piece about quantity and frequency, I should say, is really what is a discerning piece around meeting criteria for binge eating disorder. But what Dani and I and others who work with binge eating disorder want people to know is if you're binge eating once every other week, it doesn't make your struggle any less significant. It may not meet criteria for binge eating disorder, but it is still, I'm sure, quite disruptive and disturbing to you, and therefore still deserves and requires treatment. The key piece here, eating disorders are not body size specific. No one can tell if someone has binge eating disorder by appearance or body size alone. And people in all body sizes can have binge eating disorder. There is a misconception out there that only people who are in higher body weights have binge eating disorder. And we know from research and also from our clinical experience that is far from the truth. Thanks, Dani. Let's go to the next slide. So a little bit of a history of binge eating disorder. And I will say I'm a little biased here because, as I mentioned, I started my career in working with eating disorders, working with binge eating disorder 20 years ago before we had a diagnosis. 20 years ago, just to give you some background, most of when I would go to conferences, our eating disorder conferences would speak almost exclusively about anorexia and a little about bulimia. They never spoke about binge eating disorder. When I went to conferences focusing on my area of research, and I'm going to use the O word, which I know is not popular in our field, but the obesity research field, and working with doctors who were focused on that particular area. They weren't necessarily talking about binge eating disorder, but they were using the O word, obesity, a lot, and talking about behaviors around obesity. What fascinated me 20 years ago is neither population, neither research or association were talking to each other. So much so that Cherise Turner, who's a real leader in our field, started her own association called Binge Eating Disorder Association to try to meet the gap between anorexia and bulimia research and conferences and education and binge eating disorder. So that gives you a sense of just how much this was not a topic that was even considered 20 years ago. Finally, as you see here, my first point, a diagnostic criteria was finally acknowledged for binge eating disorder in 2013 in the new DSM-5. And I do sincerely think that the lateness in that arrival versus anorexia and bulimia getting diagnostic codes in the 80s and 90s was really due to our own weight stigma and weight bias. And actually, one of the first researchers, Dr. Stunkard, and his team had actually diagnostic criteria for binge eating disorder since the 80s. So it's not that it was a new phenomena that we were suddenly seeing. Research, however, is very limited as a result because without a diagnostic criteria, it's very hard to do research on something if you can't identify it. So therefore, we have a real dearth of research on binge eating disorder. The eating disorder field, finally, though, is starting to think beyond just anorexia and bulimia when we're thinking and talking about eating disorders. And the irony of all of this is that binge eating disorder is actually the most common of eating disorders. Next slide, thanks, Dani. So treatment interventions for binge eating disorder are many and varied. On the left-hand side, Dietary, so we definitely work with our clients with a meal plan and varied structure to start our clients with structure to then help move them towards a less structured approach and intuitive eating being the ultimate goal. There's differential diagnoses that we use and therefore individualized dietary plans, medical nutrition therapy to also work with clients who may or may not, like any eating disorder, struggle with other comorbidities of a medical nature, such as if you have blood pressure concerns or you have diabetes, just as we would with anorexia and bulimia. Medical, we're definitely looking at lab work, growth charts, differential diagnoses there, and of course, psychiatric with medication and clinical interventions. And then clinically, we have a number of different therapy modalities here, as you can see, almost an alphabet soup of different treatment interventions with the idea that no one modality or no one approach resonates and works for everyone. So it is absolutely essential that we as clinicians can provide a different array of treatment modalities as a way of trying to find the right combination that may work for any one client in particular. And here, just to read through some of them: CBD, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. You may have heard of these. They're quite maybe the more popular approaches. Radically open DBT is a fairly newer modality, particularly here to the Northeast, having kind of made its way across from Washington State on the West Coast. EMDR can be very helpful for trauma, which is seen in all of our clients with eating disorders. Acceptance and commitment therapy, which is gaining a lot of traction, and we're finding this to be incredibly helpful. Behavior therapy, creative arts therapy, play therapy, family therapy, nutrition therapy, and body image therapy. And Dani, as one of our primary therapists, works with our clients in a number of modalities under the creative arts therapy umbrella, and she'll be able to speak to those momentarily. And on to our next slide, Dani. And over to you.
All right. And one of those modalities that I think anchors the work that we do here at Balance is really adopting and being committed to the health at every size approach. So today that is going to anchor the work that we are going to do in the rest of our presentation, is really looking at health at every size at HAES as a foundational approach to what we think can really move recovery spaces in that new direction that Melainie was talking about. So if you are new to HAES, HAES is a weight-inclusive, anti-oppressive theoretical framework for discussing bodies, eating, and size justice. Some people call it an approach, a framework, a paradigm, a movement. You all can decide for yourself which word feels right for you. And here we'll be talking about it as both an approach and a framework. A little bit of history. So it is a registered trademark of the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. And they've adopted the principles first in 2003. Over the course of the next 10 years, they continued to evolve and evaluate, and they updated them most recently in 2013, and those are the 5 principles we'll be talking about today. It's important to acknowledge that ASDA, the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, is really committed to transparency and knows that the HAES movement and framework is going to continue to evolve to meet the needs of our community, to meet the needs of the ongoing social justice and access concerns that really anchor the foundation of this approach. So if you're also new to HAES, it's really important to clarify that the health at every size advocates, the framework, the movement, we're not making assumptions or assessments about which bodies are or are not healthy. That actually sort of goes against to the root mission of the HAES movement. We're really working towards a weight neutral approach. How can we approach health? How can we approach recovery? How can we approach medical care in a weight neutral way? Which is very different than how many people approach health and and other ways to get support around binge eating disorder often can be rooted in a mythology around weight loss is the best and only option. So we are really trying to counterbalance that lifelong narrative to something different. And so really HAES is saying that all people in all bodies are deserving of respectful medical treatment and care at every size. So trying to move assumptions or assessments about bodies of all sizes when we're only taking in a body size or a weight into account. So here are a couple ways of how HAES is anchoring binge eating disorder treatment at balance. So we're really moving to anchor conversations in our groups, in our individual work, in our programs around weight stigma and weight bias. We really think it's important to be talking about that really openly and honestly, because if we can acknowledge the way that weight stigma and weight bias has really influenced our clients' lived experience, it's going to help us all better understand the development of the eating disorder. That eating disorder could be binge eating disorder, but we also know that weight stigma and weight bias is a really important topic for all diagnoses, whether it's anorexia or bulimia. And for folks working on disordered eating or body image work, it's really important to be talking about weight stigma. Another way that we utilize HAES is we help challenge old narratives and those faulty beliefs around relationships with food, movement, medical care, and a definition of health. So we're really trying to expand our definition of health, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Another really important way that we anchor the HAES approach at balance is it's important to acknowledge the intersectionality of recovery spaces and also how racism, sexism, ableism, and other forms of systemic oppression intersect with weight stigma and the discrimination of bodies. It's important to be talking about our bodies, not just in recovery spaces, but in our communities, in society, and the ways in which, whether it's diet culture or the systemic oppression of bodies, is affecting someone's eating disorder recovery. I see some questions coming in. And Mel, I am not able to see them. So if there's anyone that you think is relevant to a slide I'm on, feel free to hop on in.
No problem, Dani. I've just written back to a couple and I will keep you posted.
Awesome. Thanks, Mel. So HAES is an evidence-based care. We're really excited about some of the research that is coming out around the benefits of approaching health in a more weight neutral way, really talking about the way in which weight stigma and its effects on mental health is equally as harmful in the ways that it's been internalized in our bodies and may have developed something like an eating disorder. And so one of the main bodies of research that we are really looking at is to talk frankly and openly in recovery spaces about the research that tells us that weight loss via restrictive dieting is unsustainable, and that for most people, it does not lead to improved health outcomes. This is really important long-term. Something that we refer to in recovery spaces as weight cycling. For folks who lifelong really believe that the weight loss is sustainable, they go through these cycles of gaining and losing weight over time that is just unsustainable and really can lead to an over-focus, an obsession with food and body. And the research shows us that these restrictive eating patterns and dieting leads to binge eating, leads to compulsive eating, leads to a lower level of self-esteem, a food obsession, really thinking about, ruminating, how much brain space does food in the body take up, can lead to eating disorders and can lead to things like depression and anxiety. So we're really trying to use the health at every size framework as a way to bridge to really talking about the harm that restrictive dieting has caused for so many people. So now we're going to jump into the different principles. And Mel and I are going to go back and forth. And so I'm going to start with the first principle, which is sort of building on everything I've been leading up to around weight inclusivity. So the first principle of HAES is that we're going to accept and respect the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes, and we're going to reject the idealizing or pathologizing of specific weights. So one way to really talk about this as an open way is just to talk about how biologically diverse humans are, and that there is a natural variety in height, weight, and body composition. And so to really try to compare, and comparison often shows up for folks with eating disorders, binge eating disorder, spending the time and energy to compare our body journey, our genetics, our body size to other people around us is really the root of where so many myths around what's possible for someone's relationship with their body. And I love this note from HAES Australia, and that they really talk about if we equalized health across the board, and that everyone was in the most health supporting environment, meaning everyone had access to timely medical care, that we had no poverty, that everything around health or your connection to wellness was affordable and accessible to nourishing foods that were both delicious and that nourished your body. And if everyone had opportunities for physical activity and joyful movement, the population would still be physically diverse. And so if we can really start to think about that the diversity of bodies is inherent, how can we break the cycle, the belief, the mythology that there is one type of body that everyone is striving for? Moving into principle 2, health enhancement. So this is where we're going to start to challenge those notions of what we think we know defines health. We want to try to expand that definition. So principle 2 of the HAES framework says we're going to support health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services, and personal practices that improve well-being, including attention to individual physical, economic, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. And for those seeking binge eating disorder treatment, it is important to expand our definition of health to be more inclusive and individualized. When we are only looking at BMI, weight, body size, we are leaving out a whole range of other health markers that are really important to be paying attention to.
Dani, a question for you there that just came in, if it's okay to take that right now, from Teresa Solomita, who says, how can we engage clients that are married to the idea that they need to be thin? That they would off the bat therefore reject the health at every size idea, and how can you engage them? Teresa, this is a question and a common occurrence, a common theme at Balance. Dani, would you like to speak to that? That feels okay to do so now.
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge the patience and the journey of this work. If we think about how long a client has been holding on to a belief that thinner is better and that weight loss is really the way to solve or fix, right? Whether you're starting to work with a client at age 22, perhaps for 10 years, maybe more, they've been in that belief. For someone in their 30s, 20 plus years, they've held on to this belief. So we also have to be practical to know that it took 20 something years to learn that narrative and hold on to it. So it is going to take a lot of time to unlearn the message and to step into it in a way. So I encourage patience, and I encourage also not shying away from it. I think sometimes if we tiptoe around the HAES principles, it sort of leaves it as evasive, as opposed to what we know in our field as clinicians and providers. We see the positive effect that it has on our clients. We have the research that backs it up, and how over the course of 2 years, someone's relationship with their food and body can really shift in a profound way utilizing this model. So it's a balance of patience with the clients, but really not backing down to what we know to be true, which is that the HAES paradigm is something that that is meaningful, and that can have a lot of power in our clients' recovery.
Absolutely, Dani. And if I may add to that, I think you capture that beautifully. Is it, as you said, it takes time, and also it's meeting the client where they are and saying, okay, we keep it front and center, but we also don't force it down people's throats, so to speak.
Sure.
But what comes up for me, and what we see as far as how the client reacts, is I think of it as the 5 stages of grieving.
Yes.
Where there's denial, like, no, I don't believe what you're telling me. How can the rest of the culture be wrong? How can my doctor be wrong? Thinner is better, thinner is healthier. And then, of course, the next part is anger. And often we see this, actually, Teresa, this might be helpful to clinicians who are on the call today, on the webinar, is we will often see an explosive kind of emotional reaction to this idea as clients start to really try to process it. And often we've heard this idea of they feel that they've been duped and lied to by the healthcare professional. So there can be some very, very strong reactions. 3rd stage of grieving, of course, is negotiation. 4th stage is depression, bargaining. 4th stage is depression, and 5th stage is then an acceptance. So, and obviously, as many of us know, that process is not linear. But just to give a sense of kind of how difficult it can be for our clients who, as Dani, you pointed out, 10, 20, 30 years, they've had this dieting messaging telling them that this is the absolute truth. And then we're presenting them with something that really challenges the very core of that. So it is very understandable that our clients are going to be skeptical, rejecting, and angry in the face of that new information as we try to lead them along this pathway to recovery. There's another question here, if it feels all right. What activities or how do you... Okay, what activities or how do you actually work on challenging the belief that thinness equals health? I have a client with atypical anorexia who's struggling with this. That's from Kelsey Gilbert. Thanks, Kelsey.
Yeah, and we are going to get a little bit more into the research. It depends on I think, the client's personality. I think for some folks, really looking at the research can be really helpful and trying to approach it in a critical way. I know that there's actually, and I'm happy to provide it to any providers, a huge community resource Google Doc that is all of the research around HAES and intuitive eating that we can share with clients in that way. So I like to utilize that in a way that for me is really helpful for clients to, again, know that we are coming to this from a foundation of real belief and have done our own clinical research and understanding and are really pushing to understand this in a holistic way. And I think for folks who are new to the work, whether you're a dietitian or a therapist, you don't have to do the principles in order, right? So we're going through them now, often starting with the principle 4, which we're going to step into in a minute, or even principle 5, which is around gentle nutrition, which is around joyful movement. Those can often be great places to start, and then circling back to talking with clients about past trauma or experiences in the medical spaces. Start talking about body inclusivity. Sometimes starting with the food, the movement is a way to begin.
Absolutely. Dani, there have been some requests to share the Google Doc that you mentioned. So maybe when I'm presenting on my slides, if you have it handy, we could put it in the chat box for everyone. Otherwise, we can send it out later.
Yeah, because I was going to send out some articles, and we could send out that link, because sometimes clicking on links via the Google chat is a little tricky, but we will definitely send it to everybody who attended today's webinar.
Great.
And then the one final thing, as Mel was talking about grief, in the bargaining zone, one of the most common narratives that comes up along folks' journey with HAES work and body liberation work is this narrative of, I believe it's okay for everybody else. I really like this idea. I believe that everyone should be liberated from the constraints of diet culture. But for me, I don't think it's going to work for me. For me, I think I'm going to need to sort of buy into to the narratives I've learned my whole life. That's a really common message that I often say is actually a really good sign, because if you've gotten to the point where you can believe it for someone else, then we know eventually we can get you to a place where you believe it for yourself too. A little bit more about respectful care. So when we're really thinking about how mental health care, working with therapists, working with dietitians, working with your primary care doctor or your specialist, often BMI and weight stigma can anchor many people's experience at the doctor. So if we're defining weight stigma, we're going to define it as weight-based assumptions and discrimination and or stereotyping based on an individual's weight or perceived weight. And a really common tool that gets utilized within weight bias and stigma is the body mass index. And I have just a couple of bullets about the BMI, but I really encourage folks to do some of their own research and reading about where the BMI came from. It's a really fascinating collection of facts. So what we know is it was invented nearly 200 years ago by an academic who did not study medicine, so not a physician, and yet it anchors our medical system and how we evaluate health. Also, the data that created the BMI was devised by and with the data for white Western European men. So not including any other data on any other human's lived experience. And yet again, it's the barometer in which we are classifying health. A really wonderful activist and author, Sabrina Strings, has a wonderful book I recommend called Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. It takes this even more deeper into us understanding how the BMI is racist, is sexist. And her quote here really outlines that to use mostly white men within your study population and then try to extrapolate that and create norms and expectations for women and people of color when their data has not been included in the initial clinical analysis, and therefore their actual health outcomes cannot be determined by these findings. So we are using this old model to evaluate bodies, and it's outdated, and we're really trying to move away from it as a barometer of health.
Dani, I mean, there's so much there, and that's an amazing quote actually from Sabrina Strings. And I think gosh, it's hard to add on to that other than to say BMI was used as a tool to measure population. It was used for population research.
Yes.
It is not meant to be used and applied to the individual. Yet here we are using it as a barometer for individuals. So, you know, that only just adds to, you know, this amazing piece here that you've put as to not only is it specific for one gender and one type of gender, i.e. white European men, it's also a population tool and not to be used for individuals. So, you know, from so many elements, it just is a tool that shouldn't be used, yet I think it is being used because honestly we have nothing else.
Yeah.
So in that absence, we're using an inaccurate, inadequate tool. So I think these are important things for us to consider as a community about even if we are just going to look at the tools and say, okay, well, how accurate are they? And the answer is that they're not very.
Yes. Yes, and I think it is pointing to a lot of the work that needs to be done in terms of how can we move the medical system, our collaboration with providers to begin talking more about weight neutrality and thinking about health in a more holistic way. I feel like a slide disappeared, and I'm going to go back just a couple because there was one piece that was really important. Aha! I feel like this is where we began talking about something else. So when I talk about holistic health, I really want to just outline it here really clearly. So if we want to move away from the BMI and we want to move away from body size as a barometer of health, here are some other factors that we want to include. Sleep, mental health, the effects of things like anxiety or depression, other mood disorders, other learning or processing disorders have on people's health. Stress. Let's think about the stress, the collective stress that we have all experienced in the past 9 months together. Think about how that has affected our health. Trauma. So thinking about trauma lifelong, and the effects and the ramifications of maybe never getting support or treatment to process that trauma, how that has an effect on health. Genetic factors. What are we predispositioned to? That includes body size. A lot of our body size is built into our DNA. How did our bodies look like our mothers, our aunts, our grandparents, our great-grandparents? And that's a piece that really can't be denied. We have to think about health environment, either the environment that people grew up in, the environment that they're living in now. What do they have access to? What is their relationship to community, to support, to social connection? All of those things affect health. Socioeconomic factors, poverty, again, about access, about support. All of these factors contribute to health, but are often not directly talked about with someone's primary care physician. And so ASDR really goes on to echo that we need to talk about health as existing on a continuum that varies with time and circumstance for each individual. Now we'll catch up a little bit more. And so bridging that into the harm of weight stigma and mental health. So if we are experiencing weight stigma and bias, we also know that that has an effect on our mental health, and that weight stigma is a significant risk factor for depression, for body dissatisfaction, for disassociation, feeling disconnected, feeling out of body, for food preoccupation, for taking up so much brain space, ruminating about food, and low self-esteem. And so those who experience weight-based stigma or weight bias tend to experience binge eating and have an increased risk for eating disorder symptoms and binge eating disorder. And the most common source of weight bias, physicians and family members. And I think we could probably do a whole other webinar, Mel, about talking about attachment, family of origin, the messages in which we receive from our family members that also contribute to our perception of our body, our perception of health. I'm going to pass it over to Mel to pick it up for Eating for Wellbeing.
Thanks so much, Dani. So principle number 4, eating for well-being. And the goal here is around promoting flexibility, individualized eating, which is based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure, rather than any externally regulated eating plan focused on weight control. So by that, I mean, really what we're talking about is, if you think about diet culture, what we eat and how much we eat is externalized, meaning we count the calories, or we weigh the food, or we measure the food, or we buy prepackaged food from said weight loss program. So it's all externalized. And so based upon that, we then tell the body how much it should be getting, which is a complete reversal of how the body and honestly survival is actually designed. Mm-hmm. We are born with an internal regulatory system that drives weight balance and growth through an incredibly sophisticated synchronized system, otherwise called intuitive eating, which is hunger, fullness, and satiety. So really what we're talking about, instead of, being led by an externalized plan, we're going back to our internal biological system and following the cues from that as to how much we eat, what we eat, and what our preferences are. So this is something that we know is essential for weight maintenance over time, or optimal weight. And if anyone wants to challenge that, I would just recommend to everyone to think about a baby. Okay, so how does a baby know how many calories they should be getting in the day? They don't. They have no idea, but they certainly can let you know, and they'll cry when they're hungry, and they'll stop when they're full. And like my baby girl did when she was a little one, when she's full, you couldn't feed her more than what she desired, she would spit it out. That is the internal regulatory system when it's working beautifully, and then dieting messes it up. And so most of us as adults, often if any of us have been on a weight loss plan at any time, will have started to mess with and question, how hungry am I? Let me push through my hunger. Or even, how full am I? Let me push through my fullness. And so this beautifully orchestrated, synchronized system gets completely messed up. Our goal is to get back to remastering that system. So individuals seeking binge eating disorder treatment often have a history of restrictive eating and dieting. And so our goal is to get them back to this system. And at Balance, our food philosophy then, as laid out here, what we start with. So I'll take you through the sequence of events here of how we get to this place of back into our regulatory, biological regulatory system. So first and foremost, the first step is we legalize all foods using the all foods fit model. No food is good or bad or even healthy, unhealthy, clean, or low calorie. We just throw away all of those labels around food. And what we want to do is get back to the idea that food is just food. Now, I'm a registered dietitian, so certainly I know, as many of you do, that some foods have higher nutritional value than others. For example, my broccoli, which I love, has higher nutritional value than my Doritos, which I also love. But if you put them together, they are both of equal value in my overall eating plan. And one is more from preference than biological value, but it is still of great value in what I eat and how I eat. So what we want to do is lose the labels, which means we also lose, or our goal is to lose and reduce, moral judgment of self and emotional judgment of food and self as a result of that. So what we often see is our clients will say, well, this food is a bad food, and therefore I am bad because I'm eating it. So we're trying to undo that work there. And research has shown actually that when we label and restrict certain foods, that it actually increases the risk of us binging and overeating those exact foods. Often when our clients will come in and they'll say, I'm addicted to carbohydrates, I can't eat carbohydrates, I'm therefore gluten-free because bread is my enemy. What we'll find is that physiologically our clients are under-eating carbohydrates. So they've set up a physiological restriction that then, of course, when you provide those very restrictive foods, they will overeat in a compensatory way that is more physiologically driven than actually any kind of addiction. But it gets confusing because there's a lot of then judgment around that and confusion on behalf of the client. Mm-hmm. So the next point here is the goal is to neutralize foods. And in doing so, we can therefore neutralize our relationship with food. Again, what does that mean? Food is just food. Food is just food and therefore doesn't have that moral judgment. Another significant goal then in treatment is to move the judgment of adequacy from that external, which we just spoke about, calories, measuring, to internal via our internal regulatory system of intuitive eating. And intuitive eating, once remastered, guides our food intake, our preferences via hunger, fullness, and satiety, and therefore not counting calories. And it is truly a liberation of sorts in not feeling controlled by food. Thanks, Dani. And over to you.
Moving into principle 5, so life enhancing movement, also called joyful movement. So this is where we're going to talk about redefining our relationship with exercise and trying to shift the intention around why we move. So we're going to support physical activities that allow people of all sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. So often folks who are seeking binge eating disorder treatment have a past relationship with movement and exercise that feels punitive. The relationship is negative. And so part of the HAES philosophy is to redefine that relationship, get to know our relationship with body connection and feel like we can move in a new way. And body connection is really essential here. If we can expand that the purpose of movement is not to change our body size, but that is to feel more connected to self, to have more energy. I have some of the alternate goals down here. We can move to this place where it can be fun, joyful, pleasurable. And if it's not connected to weight loss, can we think about, all right, I do want to work on my strength or my flexibility. Movement is helpful for my mood or my energy level, helps me sleep better. I want to work on cardiovascular strength and endurance. I want to work on body connection. All of those intentions just shift the old paradigm, the old narrative that we exercise to change our body. And which shows up even more in recovery spaces, as many times folks are exercising as a compensatory behavior to negate food that they have eaten. And that is a part of the eating disorder that we really are trying to shift the intention. How can movement be different? So those are the 5 principles. And so I'm going to sort of wrap us up with talking a little bit more about how do we integrate HAES in the work at Balance, talk a little bit about body liberation, and then certainly open it up to the questions that you all have. So again, at Balance and BED treatment and really in a lot of our groups, we are placing conversations around weight stigma and internalized weight bias at the forefront of both body image work and community work. So the power of community is also a really important concept. It's the 5th bullet. We're working with clients to expand our definitions of health, expand recovery goals to include a focus on those health behaviors. How are we shifting the goal from weight loss to shifting our health behaviors? We're continuing to challenge core beliefs, old narratives that value and worth is obtained via our external appearance. We know that our value and worth is inherent. We can't earn it. We can't lose it. And that how does it live on the internal as opposed to the external? As mentioned before, we are cultivating a great deal of patience and self-compassion in this work. It's essential to be able to find that kindness via inner child work, reparenting, self-compassion of how do we be that loving parent to ourselves to encourage our own food and body image work in a patient and compassionate way. And again, emphasis on power of community. It's one of my core beliefs as a human of the power of community. And if we can be together in a shared space with others actively engaging in conversations around HAES or body liberation, it can really expand away from those feelings of isolation that often happen before we seek out treatment and support. We feel like we are either in our eating disorder alone, or we're the only one in our family who's trying to do this work in a different way. And so to seek out and find community is a really important step in the HAES work and the body liberation work. And body liberation is sort of an all-encompassing way to think about how HAES and recovery spaces is bigger than just changing our relationship with food. We are working towards freedom. We want to feel free in our body. We want to be liberated from how much brain space that food and body takes up so that you can think about your dreams, your passions, your goals beyond your relationship with your body. The goal of body liberation is to authentically know that your value and worth is inherent. The goal is to reshape your view of health to be holistic, and that it's really important that your lived experience is taken into account. You are the expert of your life. And so how is your lived experience essential in being a part of your body liberation narrative and journey? We love to talk about taking up space here at Balance. So how do we, both in our lives, with our voice, with our body, with our energy, with our passions, learn to take up space in a meaningful way? And we are going to work to reject all the old narratives that less, smaller, thinner is better, more valuable, more lovable. I love this quote from Jess Baker, author and activist. She'll be on the book list when we send out some resources after today. And the way she defines body liberation is that we are trying to be liberated from all outside expectations, even our own. These expectations are learned over many, many years. So we know that we can unlearn them and learn something different. Body liberation and freedom, that's where it's at. That is all on the principles themselves. I'm going to throw them over to Mel to tell you how you can learn a little bit more about working with us here at Balance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dani. And after I go through these next couple of slides, we'll also be able to take a couple of the questions that have just come in. So a little bit about us here at Balance. We are here in New York City. All of our programming right now is 100% virtual. So no matter where you may be, we can certainly provide some kind of support and assistance for you. A little bit about our programming. As Dani said, we have outpatient virtual groups such as our food and mood group. We also have a wonderful body image group that Dani runs as well, an intuitive eating group. So you heard us talking about intuitive eating today. We have a group specifically designed to help people work through that piece. Outpatient virtual support, if you're looking for one-on-one, we have one-on-one therapy. We also have one-on-one nutrition counseling and also meal supports. So we can have someone who's able to virtually eat with you if you are struggling with completing meals. And then regarding programming for more support in a group setting, we have our day program, which runs Monday through Fridays from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we have a weeknight program for those of you who might be struggling, but are maxed out with work and school or school. So that Saturday program is certainly an option. Our weeknight program is certainly an option, as is our Saturday program. So that's a little bit about the support that we can offer you if you yourself might be struggling, or if you are a professional in the field and you have clients who may be struggling. Hopefully those are some resources that could be supportive to you. And this is where to connect with us. And on this last slide, we're going to leave this last slide up and we're going to take some questions here, Dani, if I may. So first and foremost, we have a few here, so this is terrific. I'm just going to go through them in order of receiving. The first one is, how can we, from Maya, how can we encourage people around us not to focus on food panels when choosing what and how much to eat? That is a great question. Dani, where do you start with that?
So food panels?
Yeah. I think that means food labels.
Can you read it one more time, Mel?
Yeah, sure. How can we encourage people around us to not focus on food labels when choosing what and how much to eat?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think it's how do you, if we're talking about your community, the people in your life, right? If you are trying not to focus on labels, how can you model a different way of being? How does you doing the work of not focusing on labels echo beyond yourself to find the voice in yourself to say, hey, I actually believe that I can listen to my body, my cues, and really develop this new way of eating. I'm actually going to reject some of those diet culture narratives. Do you come in and say, hey, actually, I've been learning a little bit more about the science and research behind this. Are you interested in learning more? I think developing a conversation style and how you want to be advocating for your needs with your community, with your family. And often it's going to take some time and you might have to say it more than once, but I think staying true to whatever your values are around food can't help but echo out into other people in your life.
Absolutely. Well said, Dani. The next question is from Melina. What do you recommend to begin to feel connected to your body? I've tried yoga before, but the feeling of being present in my body causes anxiety because of my eating disorder and body image. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really individualized. So the goal is to explore what types of movement or way of being with your body is authentically fun. For some people, a first step is walking to the coffee shop and getting coffee. That can be joyful movement. right? For some people, it's going to their favorite stores. I know in the time of now, it's a little less possible, but for some people, it's going to their bookstore and roaming around for an hour. For some people, it's rediscovering bicycling or horseback riding or the circus arts, really expanding what movement used to mean and what it can mean for you now, and starting really small. And remember, movement exercise does not have to take place at a gym, does not have to have a video that goes along with it, does not have to be a class, right? That it can really expand into any way that you can feel a little bit more connected to your body.
Yeah. Love that idea of walking around your favorite bookstore. Though I know with COVID, it's a little tricky to do some of these things, but nonetheless, the concept of that. Next question, Dani, from Lisa. I'm not sure I really believe I could ever really learn to eat truly intuitively. Is there coaching? Actually, there is. Like in DBT, where a client can get support via phone calls, when in the real world, it's hard to stick to it. Very true, Lisa. And actually, hopefully these last couple of slides gave you some information that we actually have an intuitive eating group at Balance. And we also have one-on-one nutrition counseling where we can set you up with a plan and start to help walk you through and help you to remaster intuitive eating. I hope that's helpful. Next question from Jen. I'm wondering how Health at Every Size would view a 12-step model like Overeaters Anonymous. I'm a training therapist and am considering a hypothetical client with BED who may express interest in attending OA meetings.
Yeah, so here's what OA offers beautifully is community. All right. So a lot of folks who find OA, it's the first time in their life that they have been in a community of people who struggle with binge eating or have some same struggles and core beliefs. The 12-step model really differs from eating disorder treatment because it's still rooted in weight loss. It also often talks about food addiction as something that we in the recovery field do not believe. We do not believe that someone can be addicted to food. And so it's really a philosophical difference in that OA spaces are often still rooted in this idea that weight loss is appropriate, while HAES and recovery spaces were really trying to reject that and do something different in a new way.
Absolutely. And a better model that we've found, Jen, which again came into us from the West Coast, is EDA, Eating Disorders Anonymous, because their food philosophy is exactly the food philosophy that we just outlined here, which is based in research, of course. So it's a non-restrictive, all foods fit, intuitive eating model. And actually, when we are in real life, Balance donates, we donate our space to EDA, and they use our space twice a week for their meetings. And I believe that right now they are offering virtual meetings. So you could check out their website, EDA, Eating Disorders Anonymous. Next question is, okay, again from Melina. Do you have advice on how to shift your relationship with exercise from a method of changing the way you look? I'm so sorry, excuse me. Sorry, I've got some allergies going on here. And from the way you look to a form of self-care and to remove the worry that the exercise you do isn't enough. Do you need me to reread that, Dani?
I mean, just everything that Melina said, just it's very clear, Melina, that you have some inherent wisdom, like your authentic self knows that there is a different way to be with movement, right? Even asking these questions in a curious way just gives me a view that there's part of you that has already given some thought to this and how you could approach it in a different way. So I think from this question, your last beautiful question, I'm going to say trust yourself. And that I think baby steps into it and patience is the way to go. But everything you're saying right there around what you're trying to shift, follow that instinct.
Wonderful. Our next question is, can we treat people living in Canada? And actually, we're just rolling out a new coaching service that allows us to be able to treat people outside of New York State and also globally. So please do reach out if we can be of support for you with coaching around intuitive eating and such. Another question from Teresa: can people be in your groups and be in therapy with an outside therapist? Will they have to have an individual therapist at balance? I can answer this, Dani. Absolutely. In fact, we fully encourage, many of our clients come to balance with their own outside therapist, and we encourage them to absolutely maintain that relationship because it's an essential one. And so they can join our group, and then therapists such as Dani, who leads one of our groups, would then be in communication with the outside therapist to give you updates on how your client is doing in our program, hoping that that would be great information for you with your individual work with that client. So there is absolutely no necessity, and I think it would be counterproductive for the client to insist that they also see one of our therapists individually. I don't think that's in the best interests of the client, because those relationships are so important. The next one is...
We're trying to build that community, right, Mel? So we're really trying to expand. So if and when you step out of treatment here, you have a team set up that is there waiting for you to continue that support.
Absolutely. And the next question is about insurance, and we can help our clients with their out-of-network benefits to get some coverage for services. So definitely give us a call and we'll see, what we might be able to find out there for you regarding reimbursement. And the next couple are thank yous. You are all very, very welcome. And then over here in the chat box, there are some thank yous, and I think we've covered all of our questions. Let's have a look, and it's 1 o'clock, so perfect timing. So I guess on that note, Dani, let's wrap it up, and I'd love to say a very big thank you to you all. We will be sending out the link, and as Dani said, we will also send out some links to some of those great resources that Dani mentioned. And please do reach out if we can be of help. We are very connected. We have a great community in the eating disorder field. And if we don't have services that can support you, we certainly may know others in our community that can. And we absolutely are delighted to help people connect with the care that they need. So please do reach out. Thank you all so very much. Dani, what a wonderful co-presenter.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you for being with me today, and thank you to everyone. Bye for now.